All right.
All right. I've got Robert with me. Straight talk. At 1kx, you do your own research. You decide to allocate capital into tokens. Now, what are the avenues for you to maximize your return on investment for the tokens that you hold?
So yes, I mean, if we talk about staking networks, and this obviously not so much we do ourselves actively, but me as a researcher are looking into a lot. Um, yeah, there's just two ways basically you can participate, right? You can become a node operator, which is in terms of depins, you provide storage or compute, um, or you can become a delegator, right? Which is like you just provide your token and delegate it to a node operator because they need it for staking into the network, right? And yeah, I mean, if we look at the typical data that's shared on staking rewards, this is what you would see, which we show on the slides, is like this 3 to 4% for Ethereum or the 7 to 8% on Solana, right? But when you think about it, this is mainly A, it's an aggregated number, and B, it's mainly what you get when you just delegate, right? These numbers don't show you what you can really earn as a node operator, right? But most important, really, this number kind of like hides the distribution and dispersion of the yields that you actually can get, regardless if you're a node operator or delegator.
All right. So if you speak about the aggregation of these numbers, how do actually the individual values look like for a specific example? So we have here the range of staking rewards on Ethereum with a couple of examples. Can you comment a little bit on the differences that we see in this chart?
So yes, these are basically options that you have as a delegator, to stake on Ethereum. A lot of those are actually LST protocols, right? That's why we show like Lido with staked ETH or Coinbase. And then there's obviously a couple of more, Kiln and so on and so forth. And as I said, they're delegating to each of those. You will not get the same yield for all of those. And this has basically two reasons, because A, their validation services have different incomes and different costs, right? But then also they themselves charge different commissions, for example. I mean, if you look at the chart, it looks like Coinbase might do a really poor job in performance, right? Because the income on Ethereum is a lot of like performance based, but it's actually just because Coinbase charges 25% commission, Lido only 10%. So if you account for that, they actually are really much in line with the other guys, right? But yeah, overall, different levels of income because of the performance of the validators, and different levels of cost as well for the node operation.
All right. So we've been looking at some examples of these differences between income and costs, and wanted to actually give a feel about like the values over here. What can one expect? And we looked at Ethereum from a network perspective. Can you give us a brief on what numbers do we see here, and what some of these components might vary from validator to validator?
Yes, so right on the previous slide, we just showed like the delegation, and use a delegator, right? You provide your stake, and the node operators does their job, and they take their cut, their commission, and then you get whatever's left over, right? But the question is, for a validator, what can you actually expect, and like what is a comparable number to that, right? We want to compare node operator income to delegator income, and this is why you start at your income, which in Ethereum's example is mostly about the issuance of the token rewards, right? The Ethereum emission, but then you also get the tips, and yeah, if you're lucky enough or like smart enough, also the MEV income. On the other hand, I mean, this is just the income side. You still also have costs to run the servers, right? I mean, validator costs are typically not that expensive because the requirements are not that high, but still there's 1 million validators, so it adds up. And overall, I mean, this is a simplified, rounded numbers example for the whole network, but it's just like to exemplify, okay, take the income, take the costs, and then compare the profit that you can get versus the stake that everybody has, right? The 33 million. I mean, now it's 34 million. And then you get a yield that's basically not the yield that we had on the first slide, but an actual profit yield, basically what are the node operators earning, right? And it goes without saying that this is a network view. Now there's 1 million validators, so the distribution of those on all of these things will differ, right? The income is widely varying. The cost will vary, right? Like if you're a home staker, you have a different cost base than if you're professionalized like Coinbase or Lido on the validator side.
All right, let's take the example of income and how it varies. We've put together here a characterization of the distribution of income on Ethereum validators. Can you comment a little bit on the variance that you see here?
So yes, right. I'm not sure how many people know that, but if you run a validator, you need to basically constantly provide attestations and basically perform. If you don't perform, you don't earn the rewards. And if you're really bad and do something wrong and malicious, you even get your stake slashed. So you even have negative income, right? And all of that is also based on probability. Like it's not like guaranteed that you get a block, right? It's like there's only one validator that can validate the block. If there's 1 million validators, you can calculate basically your chances by looking at the binomial distribution that's underlying there. And if you just look at the data, then yeah, it's obviously a very tight range for most of the validators, but you have these extreme outliers to the top and to the bottom, which is then for sure, given that there are some blocks that are just very juicy because there happens to be a good MEV opportunity that this lucky validator then got, right? So long story short, already on the income side, just to manifest the point of the last slide, very widespread, right? Like very large distributions, and as you can imagine, similar distribution then and dispersion on the cost side.
All right, let's contrast now the profit yield for various staking networks. We prepared first the Ethereum example, and then afterwards we have in store Solana and a couple of dip-ins. Why don't you go ahead with Ethereum?
All right, yeah. I mean, and putting it all together, right? We started with the blue line and the blue area here that shows you kind of like these yields when you delegate, right? When you put your ETH to Lido or Coinbase or anybody else. And then in contrast, the green light, and again, coming back as an apples to apples comparison, right? This is not just your income, it's income minus cost over your stake. For Ethereum, it's good because the stake is always 32 ETH. I mean, right, there are some plays with delegation and rocket pool. Let's not go too much into detail. But overall, what you can see here on the green light, if you're a node operator, yes, you get a little bit more typically, but the range is very, very, the gap is very low, right? And also the green area itself is very thin, which are just signs like the gap is not that wide, because if you look at the delegation space on Ethereum, we have such a mature LSD space, right? I think it's like, depends on you count centralized exchanges, but 60 to 80% of the stakes is in LSD protocols. So I would say this is very, very mature, and that basically is one reason why, as a node operator, if you start running validators, in general, you might not get so much of an edge to that.
All right. Now contrast that for me versus Solana. How does the situation looks like here?
So yeah, I mean, Solana typically comes already with like a higher cost base, which is mainly because you need like these 400 SOL per year to participate in the voting, right? The hardware costs are actually not that much higher. I mean, they're higher than Ethereum. But what's different here, as you can see, is the blue line when you just want to delegate to providers is actually there's actually a wider gap, right? And then you wonder like, okay, why is that? And one argument is exactly what I said for Ethereum, right? If you contrast the LST space, I mean, LSTs are probably one of the best ways and more convenient ways to delegate, because not only do you delegate your stake, you get like a liquid token in return. And as I said, this is very mature in Ethereum, but in a Solana, it's just 5% of the stake is in LSTs, so it's very low. And this is one reason why you, as a node operator, actually can still earn much of a gain, because on top of that, the difference is Solana validators have different commissions on the income that they get from token rewards, from the issuance, but also on the MEV side. So they have a little bit more wiggle room on that side. Plus, also the stake is not always the same. It's not 32 ETH on Solana. It can vary, right? Like there's some with a couple of millions and some with a couple of thousands. And that then obviously leads to very different APRs because it's always based on the stake. So that's why wide green range, but also actually a little bit more edge when you run a node here.
Right. We've seen the examples of Ethereum, Solana. Let's go briefly over a couple of dip-ins. So we have Filecoin in store here. Very briefly, what are the differences when you look at Filecoin?
So yeah, I mean, meanwhile, I hope you're used to like the green and blue lines. What's different here? Again, we have a very wider gap. Similar reason to Solana. If you have Filecoin and you want to, delegate it, there's basically just Glyph out there. Yeah, right, Glyph. It's also harder, I would say, on Filecoin to actually run an LST. The point is for Filecoin is at least locked 6 months. So the management of any LST protocol is like so much harder because, if you put the file to a node operator, like to a storage provider, it's locked for 6 months. So then if a delegator comes and like, give me my funds back, here's your LST, they need to have like this cache management to actually have the cache ready to avoid any DPEG and other issues. And this obviously makes it very burdensome to actually run a delegation or provide delegation. The other thing that we see different here is like the blue area is very wide ranged, especially in the beginning. And this comes back to the point that running a Filecoin miner storage provider is actually quite expensive. It was very expensive, like early 2023. They improved some efficiency on the proving side. The cost came down quite a lot, especially for the compute. They're still high, and that's why still you have these gaps, but also the green area narrows a little bit.
All right, so let's wrap this up. What is your recommendation here? So should I stake or should I run a node? When should I do what?
So yeah, that's obviously a little bit simplifying, right? That I need to put out the caveat as a researcher. But roughly speaking, if you have first calculate the profit yield, right? Compare your delegation yield with the profit yield of node operators, which is tricky, but once you have that, then you can see, okay, if the spread is thin, there's no point in running a node really, because having an LST especially, or even just plain native delegation, is just so much more convenient. So go for that if you're, for example, with Ethereum. However, if the spread is wider, like we saw with Filecoin and Solana, then you need to ask yourself, okay, what are the risks when I run a node? And typically this is the income volatility, which we didn't show, but like, for example, live peer is quite higher. But even Ethereum, right? Like we already saw, it can be quite widespread. There's additional things like the operational burden to keep it running, but also the entrance to barrier. Again, Filecoin miners, like getting into the game of becoming a storage provider, it just like is quite a lift to get into this. Live peer the same, right? It's just also might not be even capital, but it's just very complex. So that's why if that is high, you might still go and don't earn the extra gap and just delegate. In terms of Solana, I mean, it's not low, the cost and the lift, but it's decently that I would say, okay, if you can afford it, then you can run it.
All right. Thank you so much, Robert. We've been geeking about this for roughly 1 year now. This is ongoing research, and we're going to continue to put together research. So if our audience wants to read it, where should they follow you?
So yeah, it's out there, right? Like follow me on Twitter or 1kx on Mirror. And I guess anything we cooperate, you can also follow Mihai on his Twitter. We'll share together.
All right. So for the Messari research, go at messari.io/research, and you're gonna find all the goodies in there. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.